This is the 14th in a series of programs I'm doing on wisdom and what famous thinkers in philosophy, religion, psychology, and literature have said about it. The last two programs dealt with the question, what might be a wise person's attitude towards other people? This program will deal with two specific questions. First, what might be a wise person's attitude towards both life and death? And secondly, what might a wise person see that an unwise person might not see? First, the question, what might be a wise person's attitude towards life? The great French essayist Montaigne provides, I think, a good overview of what so many of the great thinkers have said. Montaigne described life as bittersweet, and he contended that that's good in a certain sense, in that because life is somewhat bitter, it makes it easier to die. That if life were 100% sweet, it would make dying much more difficult. Professor Joseph Campbell, who taught at Sarah Lawrence College for many years, and who was a student of many cultures, and what those cultures taught about life and death, said this. He said, life's great, but it hurts. I suspect many Americans would be surprised at learning about what so many of the great thinkers in history have said about life. Again, allow me to give you a brief overview. Seneca, the famous Stoic philosopher, and it should be pointed out that the Stoics believe that life is difficult, indeed that life is like a battle, and that we should look upon ourselves as warriors. Seneca said this about life: the wise person neither loves nor hates life. And Socrates, who was sentenced to death on what most people today would consider trumped up charges, after the verdict was read to him, said this to the jury. Socrates said, "And now I go to die, and you go to live. Which is better? Only God knows." Shakespeare, on the subject of life, provides a certain illumination in what is perhaps the most famous monologue in all of literature and drama. And of course, I'm referring to the to be or not to be monologue by Hamlet, in which Hamlet said the following: "To be or not to be, that is the question, whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take up arms against a sea of troubles, and by opposing end them. To die, to sleep, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep. For who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the pangs of disprized love, the law's delay, the insolence of office? Who would burdens bear to grunt and sweat under a weary life, but that the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from which no traveler returns, perplexes our will, and makes us rather bear those ills we have, rather than fly to those ills we know not of. Thus, conscience does make cowards of us all." Shakespeare, of course, in that monologue, is zeroing in on much of the bitterness of life. Well, what about the sweetness of life? Of what does that consist? Well, so many of the great thinkers have pointed out that much of the sweetness of life concerns the following: a child's face and voice, a beautiful day, a hug, a kiss, reducing someone's pain, physical or mental, or at least trying to reduce somebody else's pain. A job well done, an affectionate smile, memories of noble deeds, memories of noble deeds, sex with real affection, promoting justice in the world. Another aspect of sweetness that we can derive from this life is the inspiration we get from reading about or observing the noble deeds done by the most noble people in history. For example, Mother Teresa and Albert Schweitzer helping the poorest of the poor. Mother Teresa in India, Dr. Albert Schweitzer in Africa. Schweitzer spent more than 30 years as a medical doctor in French Equatorial Africa, treating the poorest of the poor. Gandhi assassinated for his tolerance. Mahatma Gandhi, a Hindu, was assassinated in India by another Hindu. Why so? Well, that Hindu believed that Gandhi was showing too much deference to the Muslim minority in India. So in a certain sense, Gandhi was assassinated for promoting tolerance in the world. Rosa Parks also provides us with much inspiration. Her courage in fighting bigotry and injustice. And of course, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King, using nonviolence as his only weapon to fight injustice and a lack of democracy in America, when so many of the people who opposed him resorted to violence. Nonetheless, Dr. King, till his dying day, persevered in trying to use nonviolence to deal with the problems our country was experiencing and to try to bring greater justice and democracy to this country. I suggest to you the noble deeds of people like Mother Teresa, Albert Schweitzer, Gandhi, Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr. inspire us and provide us with another example of some of the sweetness of life, their inspiration. Much of the sweetness of life also comes from the inspiring deeds of people in our immediate environment. Parents caring for a special child, for example, a child with Down syndrome. The elderly man caring tenderly for his ailing wife. The student in school or university who refuses to cheat when others around him or her are cheating. People who sacrifice job promotions to do the right thing. Indeed, Aristippus, famous thinker of antiquity, said this: "The most impressive spectacle in life is the sight of a virtuous person pursuing his course in the midst of vicious people." Plato believed that noble deeds are far more beautiful than the most beautiful of bodies. Is there any sensitive, warm-hearted person whose heart is not touched and inspired by those struggling with integrity to deal with life's frustrations and adversities? It's been said that life is made significant by the struggle. Life is made significant by the struggle. The Bhagavad Gita and so many other wisdom books tell us that the process of living is far more important than the result. Jesus, in a certain sense, commented on this when he said in his famous words, "What does it matter if one gains the whole world but loses one's soul?" Those who have an eye for the beauty in life, are not impressed by job titles and expensive possessions, although they could be impressed by the means which were used to acquire those job titles or expensive possessions. Indeed, the process of acquiring them could be beautiful or ugly. Beautiful in that if one acquired the job promotions and expensive possessions by a life of virtue, by a life of loving other people, then, of course, we would say the process is beautiful. But if one has acquired that job title and or expensive possessions by going along to get along, or what is worse, by acts of deviousness and ruthlessness, then, of course, we would say the process is ugly. The process has been ugly. There is a Jewish prayer which emphasizes the importance of the process in life, and that the idea that the process is far more important than the result. And this is the prayer. Life is a journey. We see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. And how does one measure success in living this life? Well, so many of the great thinkers have said we measure our success in living this life by the state of our souls. Among my heroes and heroines are people I know. For example, immigrants I know and deal with and talk to on a regular basis, immigrants in both Manhattan and Staten Island, who work 12 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week. And of course, I know several single moms struggling to juggle job and family responsibilities, some of them victims of deadbeat dads. Some people may celebrate the Tiger Woods and the Madonnas of this world. I celebrate the immigrants, so many of the immigrants I know, and so many of the single moms I know, and so many other people like them, again, who are struggling with dignity to try to meet life's responsibilities every day and to deal with life's adversities. A summary statement now. What might be a wise person's attitude towards life? Well, I think it's fair to say there is a consensus among the great thinkers that life is difficult, but we can increase our tranquility and joy. How so? Well, the short answer is by acquiring wisdom. What might be a wise person's attitude towards death? Religious thinkers, philosophers, psychologists, men and women of letters provide some answers to that question. And I must tell you that their answers may not only surprise you, but make you feel uncomfortable. So be pre-warned. There is a consensus among the great thinkers that we should make it a habit to think about death and dying. If done correctly, it can make our lives more fulfilling. Of course, if done incorrectly, thinking about death and dying can make us depressed and even worse. Well, how does one know if one is thinking about death and dying in a correct way or an incorrect way? A wise way or an unwise way? Well, if done wisely, thinking about death can give us perspective. It can help us to see the forest and not just the trees. It can teach us about what's really important in life. Thinking about death and dying on a regular basis can remind us that we have only a limited time to live, to love, to experience. It's a reminder, in other words, to use our time wisely. It's also a reminder to appreciate others in the present moment. After all, either we or they might not be here tomorrow. Also, it can help calm us. The idea is that whether we worry or don't worry, we're going to die. And for all people, especially those who believe in a judgment day by a God, for those people, thinking about death is extremely important in the sense that it's a reminder to try to keep their souls clean in view of the fact that someday they believe there will be a judgment day. And of course, Thinking about death and dying on a regular basis is a reminder that we're all in the same boat. The president is going to die. The sexiest woman, the sexiest man in the world is going to die. Donald Trump cannot prevent himself from dying. He cannot buy himself, or buy his way, I should say, out of dying. Social status means nothing. Social status means nothing. Death is the great equalizer. All the major religions teach that thinking about death can raise our consciousness and again remind us of what is really important in life. Can one be a good Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Jew, Buddhist if one assiduously avoids thinking about death? Well, I think it's fair to say there is a consensus among the religious thinkers, at least, that it's not likely that one can assiduously avoid thinking about death and be a truly religious, spiritual person. The Dalai Lama has said that thinking about death can make our lives more meaningful. Here are his own words. When you reflect upon death and are aware of it constantly, your life will become more meaningful. The Dalai Lama also emphasizes the idea that we should think about impermanence, that nothing is really permanent in this life. And again, that impermanence can teach us not to sweat the small stuff. Again, thinking about the impermanence of virtually everything can teach us not to sweat the small stuff. Writer Thomas Mann, in his very famous book entitled The Magic Mountain, raises the question, would we love life so much if we knew we weren't going to die? Thomas Mann has one of his characters, again in the Magic Mountains, say the following: for death is the spiritual principle. Love of it leads to love of life and love of humanity. Does the fact we are going to die encourage us to become more spiritual people? Can it make us reevaluate the importance of possessions, social status, wielding power over other people, impressing other people? After all, even if we succeed in impressing other people, they are going to die and we are going to die. Can thinking about death help us to be less angry and hateful? Do we really want to waste time being angry and hateful? The clock is ticking. Aristotle provides some illumination here. Aristotle said that when it comes to anger, it's very important that we be angry at the right time, with the right person, to the right degree. Aristotle emphasized the idea that anger can eat us up and destroy any opportunities we might have for experiencing tranquility and joy in this life. The idea is we can't let anger, even when it's justifiable, get the best of us, eat us up, so to speak. And again, what is the antidote to anger? Well, it can be the idea, I'm going to die. Life is short. I can't waste time being angry and hateful. Philosopher Marcus Aurelius also provides some illumination here. He said that our anger is more detrimental to us than those things that have caused our anger. I have been talking about what might be the wise person's attitude towards life and death. And I think America's premier poet, Walt Whitman, in his masterpiece, The Leaves of Grass, provides much illumination. Whitman celebrates both life and death. That's right. In his great poem, Leaves of Grass, he celebrates life, but he also celebrates death. And what specifically does Whitman tell us in this very long poem. Actually, if you have not read it, I should tell you that Leaves of Grass is a poem consisting of poems, probably about 100 poems. It runs to over 400 pages in most editions. Well worth reading. Indeed, some critics, literary critics, believe Whitman was the greatest of American writers and poets. Walt Whitman tells us that life's great, but it often hurts, but that we should hang in there. We should find a place of joy, and the joy will burn out the pain. He also tells us to be observant of the common sights around us, that so many of the common sights around us are beautiful and inspiring, and that so often we see them but don't notice them. Whitman encourages us to become more observant of what we see right around us. I think Whitman would agree with the idea that a life well used makes it sweet to die. What might a wise person see that other people might not see? Well, first of all, what does a wise person wish to see? The great thinkers tell us that wise people wish to see the unchangeable, the eternal, the universal, in contrast to the transient. That unwise people are preoccupied with the transient, whereas wise people tend to be preoccupied with the eternal, with the unchangeable. Where does one go to get perspective, to see the forest, so to speak? In other words, where does one go to focus one's mind on the eternal, on the universal? And also, where does one go to focus one's mind on the transient? Let's begin with the latter. If one wishes to see just the trees, or if that's all one does see, whether one wishes that or not, well, where does one go? Well, newspapers provide a good view of the transient. TV, radio news, most of the internet, programs like Larry King Live. Excuse me. Well, where does one go to get a handle on the unchangeable, the eternal? Well, one would go to holy books as well as other wisdom books in philosophy, psychology, and literature. Books such as, well, let me start with the holy books. The Holy Bible, the Bhagavad Gita, very famous Hindu holy book, which, as you know, I often allude to. The Dhammapada, perhaps my favorite holy book. It's a book of quotations by the Buddha. The Quran, the Talmud, very famous Jewish holy book. And of course, if one is seeking wisdom, if one wants to see the forest and not just the trees, if one wants perspective on what's really important in life and what life is really all about, I would encourage one to read Shakespeare. And the critics are pretty much agreed that among his greatest plays, almost certainly his greatest plays, Hamlet, King Lear, and Macbeth. And of course, if one is seeking wisdom, one should go to the writings of Confucius. The Analects is a book that is considered to be the primary source on Confucius and what he taught. And of course, one would want to read Plato, Tolstoy, Cervantes, Emerson, and Freud, among many others. Incidentally, if I don't have time at the end of this program, I promise you that next week I will finally get to more than a few book recommendations, again, concerning books that help us to acquire wisdom. Wisdom seekers want to know reality. They want to know the way things really are. Wisdom seekers want to know what's true and false about life. They want to know what's true and false about human relationships, about marriage, about friendship, about God. They want to know what's really true and false about romantic love. I think it's fair to say so many of the great thinkers have said that so much of what we hear about romantic love is simply not true. It's fantasy. And if we take to heart so many of the songs about romantic love, we may be more confused than illuminated about it. There's an important question here, and that is, do programs like Larry King Live, reality TV, American Idol, do they really help us in learning about what's important in life and what isn't? Will most TV programs, advertising, pop music, movies, stimulate our thinking in any significant way about what's causing our stress, our anxiety? Will any of this help us to deal with our fears and our unbridled desires? Is it possible that so much of the mass media is more likely to confuse us, even lead us astray, than to help us to think clearly? I think it's fair to say that wise people are very discriminating in what they watch and listen to. Again, wise people are very discriminating in terms of what they watch and listen to, and are highly skeptical about what the advertising industry claims will make us happier. As I indicated before, wise people hope to see or wish to see the unchangeable, the universal. They want perspective. They want to learn about what's really important in life before it's too late. Finally, Henry David Thoreau, in his masterpiece, Walden, reminds us that we are all artists. He penned the following words: "To affect the quality of the day, that is the highest of arts."